The American dream used to be a white picket fence, a single family house, and a place to raise your family. But silently, that American dream is disappearing. Is the American dream even accessible? And what is happening to it? BlackRock, the private equity behemoth, gets a really bad name. Sorry, Larry, Mr. Fink. We're going to talk about you a little bit here today and how you're really impacting the housing market. Today I am going to depart a little bit from just Colorado history to talk about some problems that I see in the industry. If you hate it, leave a comment below. If you love it, leave a comment below. I'd just love to know feedback and to see if we should be making more videos like this or not. BlackRock has more of an indirect relationship with the housing market. There's been a lot of wrong ideas floating out there that BlackRock is actually going in and bidding on houses and bidding against you, particularly on a house, and buying that house. However, BlackRock, I hate to say it, is smarter than that. BlackRock doesn't actually own one single company. The way a company like BlackRock works is they invest in thousands of companies, and they have a 3 to 10% share in any one of these companies. So what I started to really dig deep on is what companies does BlackRock own, and what sort of investment is BlackRock doing out there? When we look into that, there's so many real estate companies that BlackRock has interest in, as you can see. Some of them concern me and some of them don't, but as you can see with the big asset management companies, it gets quite confusing who owns what. In a lot of cases, they are the leading shareholder, but it's not like they own the entire company. This is how BlackRock works. It's how it's such a safe company to have your 401k or an IRA in, because their philosophy is if you spread out and invest in all of these big companies, you have a safe investment. And that's how BlackRock has built itself to be such a giant vehicle of financial capital. And really, anyone out there that has a 401k, an IRA, or money that is in a bank, because those banks have the ability to invest that money, we're all guilty of giving BlackRock money to work with because of the very nature of our financial system, which is unfortunate. But it is what it is, and BlackRock's out there, and they own these companies that have real estate. So let's talk about a few of those companies that they have large stake in, and let's talk about institutional investors and see what kind of impact they're having on the market. So we're going to start with BlackRock. BlackRock has indirect ownership in several companies. 3 companies come to the top of the list. And in fact, when you go to BlackRock's website, there's this whole press release that they have about how they're not buying single family homes. That's not what they do, because there's been so much out there in this past presidential election and in the news about how these big asset management companies are buying single family homes and they're competing against you. Not necessarily true, in a cloaked way, kind of true. But in that same sense, BlackRock is also invested in companies that are introducing inventory to the market, like home builders. So let's start there. BlackRock has a stake in at least 2 of the large home builders. Lennar, which is in the Denver area. There's all sorts of Lennar builds. Here are a few that you could buy. And D.R. Horton, another just behemoth of a builder. And if it's not BlackRock that owns it, well, Warren Buffett does. He owns another one of the home builders in the area. Oakwood Homes is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway also had stake in D.R. Horton. So these are big asset management or financial managers that are investing in new home builders. And in a way, that's a good thing. That actually makes home ownership more affordable in a lot of cases because it introduces much needed inventory into the supply chain that is heavily constricted. So hopefully YouTube, you won't cancel this video since I started out with the positives of BlackRock's and Berkshire Hathaway's being invested in a large way in real estate. But that's about all we're gonna stay on the positive note. It's very fastly gonna evolve into the negative here because of the other companies that a BlackRock owns. And those companies are groups that are not as concerning to me, like Simon Property Group, which is a major owner of shopping malls, so no surprise that a lot of these larger real estate holdings, BlackRock is an investor in those. That doesn't really add competition to the single family inventory. Another big company that BlackRock has is Prologis. I don't know how to pronounce it. A leading owner of industrial and logistic real estate. But saving the best for last, Avalon Bay Communities is an example of a large owner of apartment communities. This, folks, is where I see a problem more than them even building or buying single families. This is a bigger problem than them buying single family homes. And here's why. If you're in Denver, Colorado, or really any developing city in the United States, you see big developers everywhere, the same names on all these apartment buildings. Well, I think you wouldn't be surprised that these real estate investment trusts that put these big buildings up, BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard, the big private equity managers have a stake in those companies. And here's why I think that's a problem. I know a lot of you have heard what the World Economic Forum has said, that we're going to have a generation that owns nothing, and they're happy about it. Now, if you've ever been in some of these apartment buildings, and I've lived in some while I've been here in Denver, they're amenity rich, they're lifestyle friendly, they give you that experience that people are looking for in urban areas with an in-house gym, with a place where you can throw a party and a lounge. They've got games, they've got huge TVs, they've got fireplaces outdoors, they've got great sweeping views of the mountains. And they're pretty nice. I mean, finishes have quartz counters, stainless steel appliances, nice vinyl plank flooring, in-unit washer and dryer, etc. And the problem right now, especially in a market that has higher interest rates because of inflation, what we're seeing is these rents are cheaper than a mortgage in a lot of cases. Sometimes not. Talk to me about how we can make that different if you're interested. But in a lot of cases, people continue to rent because they're like, well, how can I spend $3,500 on a mortgage when I could live in this building for $2,900? The problem is prices have gotten out of control in both the rent sector and the actual buying sector of real estate. So most people quite simply cannot afford it. And when it comes down to saving $600 a month, they're gonna make that decision, especially if they don't have a down payment or the ability to get into a house. Although in Colorado, there are some great first-time homebuyer programs that eliminate the need for that. Most people don't know about that, and they continue to rent. And they enter into a cycle known as rent trapping. Here's the issue. If you're spending a good amount of your money every single month on your housing, you have no money going into savings. No money going into savings means you cannot buy a house, which means you're trapped renting for forever. And that is exactly what scares me so much about big asset management companies building all of these Class A rentals. And I mean, in Denver, Colorado, there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of doors just in Denver. In the Golden Triangle itself, one neighborhood in Denver, there's been over 10 Class A mid-rise buildings that have introduced hundreds of doors of inventory. albeit there's one big condo project that's under development in Denver right now. What does that mean? That means that institutional investors see it as more profitable to get you to rent for your whole life than to buy a property. So that's the one area that scares me the most when we're talking about BlackRock, when we're talking about Vanguard, and we're talking about all these big companies owning real estate. It's the incentivizing of Class A, experience-based, way too expensive rentals that keeps people in a rent trap that prevents them from buying, that now opens up opportunity in the real estate market. So let's transition to single-family homes. I think a lot of you know interest rates are higher now. There's less buyers out there. There's more inventory than there was 3 years ago. And that is because people's payments are so much higher. There are ways around that, so let's talk. But just to keep it simple, people's payments are a lot higher for the same purchase price than they would have been 3 or 4 years ago if they're financing. Well, guess what? Private equity companies have a lot of cash, so their holding cost is so much less than a normal person that needs to get a mortgage. All right? So what we have here is now BlackRock putting up Class A rentals and investing in companies that do that, and at the same time depleting the real estate market so that way there's price softening, there's less bidding wars, to the point where you can gobble up real estate now cheaper. That's our current chapter that we're in. But when did this transition really start to happen? When did we start to see institutional investors gain more real estate? To answer that question, we've got to go back to 2008, the Great Recession, which was a housing-based recession, and millions and millions of homes were foreclosed on because of predatory lending and mortgage-backed securities that were compiled with really bad loans that eventually unraveled and fell apart. I'm not going to go into the causes of the Great Recession. Watch The Big Short, read the book, and there's tons of data out there. But what the recession did was allow for millions of homes to go to auction. And the people that can buy these houses at auction aren't the people that are defaulting on mortgages, aren't generally the people that are getting a mortgage. It's people that had cash and they could afford to buy a single family home on auction. And in fact, before 2011, there was not a single institutional investor in the United States of America that had over 1,000 homes. Fast forward to today, where there are over 500,000 homes owned by 32 institutional investors. So that's a big, big shift that happens in the real estate market, and it happens bigger in some areas than others, particularly the Sun Belt states and the South. These people, they own a lot of homes. Looking at a GAO report, which I'm going to put in the description below, goes really in detail. 14% of the single family inventory in Phoenix is owned by institutional investors, 10% in Vegas, 9% in Seattle, a whopping 25% in Atlanta, Georgia, 15% in Tampa, 13% in Orlando. You get it. They're buying houses, and a lot of them. Who are these 13 biggest institutional investors? Well, one of them is Blackstone. Yes, Blackstone, not BlackRock. I get that they really are a close name, and the people that founded BlackRock started at Blackstone. but they are different. Brookfield Asset Management, Starwood Capital Group, Apollo Global Management, Ares Management, Bain Capital, KKR, Nuveen Real Estate, PGIM Real Estate. Who owns these companies? Brookfield Asset Management. Biggest investors: Partners Value Investment LP, Capital World Investors, Amex Income Fund of America Class A, Royal Bank of Canada, Vanguard, Capital International Investors, McKinsey Financial Group. Big asset management companies. That's who owns that one. Blackstone. Biggest three investors. Vanguard Group, 9.14%. BlackRock owns some of Blackstone, 6.59%. Capital World Investors at 5.23%. I guess BlackRock and Blackstone aren't that different. The Royal Bank of Canada. Number one investor, Vanguard. 2, TD Asset Management Inc. 3, CIBC World Markets. 4, McKinsey Financial Corporation. Are you getting the picture here? All these companies, they just own each other in a small enough percentage. But really, it's all the same companies, all owning each other, all buying single-family residences. So, moral of the story here is get high interest rates, create Class A inventory, convince people not to buy homes, and, well, then they can own all the real estate. And since a significant portion of the real estate is owned by baby boomers, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, my concern is what happens when that family passes on and has to sell its real estate. There's going to be a large influx of properties that move from a private individual to an asset management company. And that terrifies me. I know in Denver, there's always headlines when one of these really nice apartment buildings opens up. We just had one open on Colfax yesterday. I saw an article. The name is Wilder. So you can live on the wild side and have all your amenities and all that jazz. We shouldn't be celebrating this, in my opinion. Like, yeah, it's great that there's more housing. Yeah, it's great that more inventory comes on. But let's look at the prices. I mean, a studio here is $2,000 a month. Some of these 2 bedrooms, they don't even have prices. And just for a case study, who owns some of these buildings in Denver? Well, ownership is not an easy question to answer when it comes to these big buildings, because there are holding companies owned by holding companies owned by institutional investors. So a lot of times you have to dig really deep to get to the institutional investors. And Wilder is a great example of this. Wilder is managed by Greystar. If you look into who the big owners of Greystar are, well, Six Circles Trust is one, THYUX, XHYC, XBB. Let's look at one of these, Six Circles Trust. When you look at who owns Six Circles Trust, that's a trust that is intended for investors who are part of investment advisory programs or trust managed by JP Morgan Chase Bank or its affiliates. Who are its affiliates, everybody? So my whole point is, if you dig really deep into the ownership on these Class A buildings, they are owned by institutional investors. And if you dig really deep on who is buying single-family homes, well, it's institutional investors. And that is the greatest plan of institutional investors to gobble up real estate that there ever has been. Create Class A rentals with high return that keep people rent trapped. Keep people rent trapped by making sure that we're in an environment that has high interest rates to where rent is cheaper than the mortgage. Get them to not get a mortgage, to have less competition, so that way they can get more inventory, just like they did in 2008, which is where this all began and when our world really started to change. So what's the way around it? I know, you're a realtor. What are you going to say the way around it is? Well, it's simple. It's to buy houses. It is to not rent. It is to take advantage of first-time home buyer programs and start building equity as these companies gobble up more real estate, which continues to increase prices because they don't care about the interest rate. And to do what people in the previous generation did, which is to just sit on a real estate holding. If we do that, and the transfer of private real estate ownership goes from boomers to millennials to Gen X to Gen Alpha to Gen Beta, we can continue to leave the American dream for our family and for future generations. But if we continue to let BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard, McKinsey Capital, etc. gobble up all the property, the American dream is over. And Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum was right. People will own nothing, and they'll be happy about it.